By way of introduction, I want us to have an appreciation of why we can talk about health issues or health ministry. For us as a church, we have come to realize the need or the work of health ministry toward our mission fulfillment. With that in mind, we have been using and we use and we believe that health ministry is the right arm of mission. As such, we use it. That is why we have many health institutions. From the onset, when the church began, we came to understand the power and the value of health ministry toward our mission fulfillment. Christ's redemptive ministry is our proven or proved example towards wholeness. What it means to be whole and what it means to respond to sickness. We can only learn full lessons from Christ's example. We have the spirit of prophecy that gives us guidance and insights, and everything else so far is clear. We have a powerful example of Christ, and also we have the powerful health message through the spirit of prophecy. But the reality on the mission or in the mission field, with regard to the number of health institutions that we have as a church, particularly back home in Africa, it seems to suggest or to point out or to indicate a problem among us. All this powerful message, it seems like we have few institutions as far as the health institutions are concerned. For example, in our own country, we do not have even a hospital, but the church has been there for more than 100 years so far. In some settings, yes, the hospitals are there, but it seems like the church is losing more because of failure or misconception on health issues. Yet we have powerful message and we have all the structures in place as far as our health principles are concerned. What is our problem or where are we going wrong as a people? Number one, we need to establish proper understanding of sin and sickness and what it means to be whole. Once this is in place, it may help us to appreciate or to practice or to win more souls for Christ, as Christ used to do during his time here on earth. Our attitude toward the sick must change. Seem to be negligence or neglecting of those that are affected. There is also the issue of discrimination of those that are suffering, stigmatization, condemning the sick, and many other issues. With all this, with us, it is difficult to retain members, particularly those that are sick or those that suffer from sickness. The issue of addressing misconception must be done on what it means to be sick and what it means to be whole. We have different definitions and understanding on what it means to be sick and what it means to be whole. Presenters one after the other, from the look of things they've been pointing out, in the likes of Dr. Mosera just a few minutes ago, she pointed out the issue of condemning and also accusing those that are affected as people who are going under punishment from God for their sins. Therefore, the issue of understanding or establishing a proper understanding of what it means to be whole should be done. Let's look at the paradox of sin and sickness. Sickness is not synonymous with sin. As some people may think or assume, whenever a person is sick, they identify that person as more sinful than those that are whole or those that are not sick. At the same time, we cannot talk of sickness without sin. We can only understand sickness in the view of sin. That's where the paradox is coming from. Sinful condition after the fall versus sinful act. When we are talking of sin in the presence of, when we are talking of sickness in the presence of sin, what are we talking about? Is it because whenever a person is sick, therefore, that person has committed a sin? In this particular case, if we are looking at sin or a sickness from the perspective of a sinful condition or as a result of our foe, our understanding or our perception of sickness will differ, or will be different, or be more meaningful, or be more redemptive than our understanding of sickness as a result of sinful act. In other words, if we are to look at those who are suffering from sickness as victims of sinful practices, we will do more damage to the cause of the church's mission, or to the church, to the cause of the church as far as mission emphasis is concerned. If we look at people who suffer from sickness as people who suffer because of the fall, our understanding of sick people will be more redemptive than condemnatory, as it were. Is it possible to get sick without committing a sinful act? If the answer to that question is yes, then wholeness should be understood in terms of grace. When we are looking at the issue of sickness, the church should not be viewing people that are sick as perpetrators or as people who are most active in practicing sin. Instead, we need to understand sickness from the perspective of our sinful condition. Because of that, it's possible to get sick without committing a sin. It is possible to be victim of sin, but without you committing sinful act. For that reason, we need to understand the concept of wholeness from the perspective of grace. It is only by God's grace that we can become whole. If you are not feeling sick, or if you are not sick in any way, according to our understanding of sickness, regard it as only a gift from God, or God's gracious gift to you. It is not something that you can work on by yourself and accomplish or achieve it by yourself. But it is something that is only granted by God's gracious act. Because of the circumstances in which we are living right now, in this sinful condition, knowing that we are carrying all sinful bodies, as it were, none of us is immune to sickness. Whether you act or you practice sin, or you are innocent as far as lifestyle is concerned, you can be a victim of circumstances while you are innocent, or in your spiritual innocence. And for that reason, this is an appeal for us on how we should be careful in treating those that are sick. Let's look at Christ's ministry of grace as our example. Christ was concerned with all aspects of what it means to be whole, which means he would address the physical needs of people. He will heal the physical sickness. Number two, Christ will heal mental sickness by casting out demons. Christ will heal the spiritual sickness by forgiving sins. Christ will heal the social aspect by restoring relationships. As such, if we as a church, we need to be holistic in terms of our approach to the issue of health ministry. We need to look at all these four components of wholeness, rather than only focusing on physical matters of wholeness. This means, or this implies, the church, in as much as it may be having some structures to address physical sickness or physical illness, we also need to address the issue of mental sickness, as Brother Ranjit just presented a while ago. It seems like today the church has no structures in place to address the issue of mental sickness. Back home on the continent, or back home in Africa, the issue of mental sickness is usually related to or identified to issues of witchcraft and all these other kind of things. To that extent, we have many church members who go the way of syncretism by way of consulting witch doctors, because they feel and they believe the church has no capacity to address issues of mental sickness. And with that in mind, this is a challenge to us as a church. Let's have structures, and let us be concerned about issues or cases of mental sickness. let us also be concerned about the issue of spiritual sickness by forgiving each other. One of the serious things that is affecting our church at this time or in this day and age, as far as mission fulfillment is concerned, it is the issue of forgiving sinners. It is more easier for sinners that are already outside the world or outside the church to come or to find their way into the church than for those that have fallen to re-enter into the fold of believers. It seems like the church, it is not prepared to forgive the wayward and re-accommodate them by way of re-entry to those that have fallen or that have drawn back. And as much as we talk of reclaiming sinners, but in terms of practice, the church is still falling short on that one. Not only to church members, but even to ministers as well. Reclaiming those that fall along the way, it seems like the church finds it very difficult to reclaim them. Christ addressed that one by forgiving sinners. And also healing social sickness, the church needs to be more concerned about issue of healing relationships. Healing relationships. Let's talk of restoring and healing social relationships. Let's look at the misconceptions on sickness and wholeness. Much of our misconceptions on sickness and wholeness comes from our erroneous definition of terms. Our erroneous definition of terms. What does it mean to get sick? What does it mean to be whole? We have biased conceptual orientation to life, such as what you see when you open the Bible to the book of John, chapter 9. Disciples asked Christ, Christ, tell us, what has happened to this man? He was born blind. Who sinned, him or the parents, that he was born blind? That kind of question suggests or indicates disciples the biased conceptual understanding of sickness or blindness. They had their own understanding of what it means to be blind. You also look at the issue of long-cherished traditional presuppositions. With this one, you will notice back home in Africa, nothing that just happens, particularly issues of sickness and death, that is natural. A person does not just get sick, but otherwise a person is bewitched in order to get sick. With that in mind, you can also see this one by way of making reference to the book of Job. Job's friends had to accuse Job because they had their own cherished traditional presuppositions. They accused him of sickness, of being a sinner, or to have trespassed. That is why, or that was the reason why Job suffered. Same applies with us back home. We believe and we have our own presuppositions as far as issues of sickness are concerned. Each kind of sickness or type of sickness, we attribute it to its own original cause. Death also is not natural, it is caused. And with this comes with many other presuppositions. Limited understanding of what it means to be whole. Our limited understanding is seen in how we interpret issues of health, such as the issue of spirit of prophecy and health issues. We have issues of extremism. Some people associate sickness with eating of meat, in as much as they may be true, but sometimes they go to extreme. Some people think or associate wholeness with being a vegetarian. For them, it means once you are a vegetarian and you go for exercises, you will never get sick. And yet, even those that are vegetarians and those who have some kind of, or who practice good kind of lifestyle in terms of exercises, drinking of water, resting, and many other things, they too still get sick. Why? Because of their life within the framework of sinful condition. Then speculative theological assumptions. The issue of associating sickness with punishment from God. Once a person gets sick, people sometimes, or church members, sometimes they associate with sickness with punishment from God. Sickness and wholeness in the Bible. Wholeness and holiness are biblically related. If you look at the book of Exodus, the book of Leviticus, particularly the book of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, it portrays an understanding that wholeness and holiness are biblically related. For that reason, there are a whole range of biblical principles, health principles that are given. Some, as you will notice, they are moral in nature. Some are sanitary principles or dietary principles, social principles. All these try to address the issue of wholeness and holiness together. Sickness and wholeness in the presence of sin. Sickness and wholeness is personal responsibility. Each person has also some personal obligation toward the issue of wholeness. Then wholeness and willful obedience are biblically related. In other words, where the issues of wholeness are discussed, God also gives a guideline of how his people can be whole by way of giving them some guidelines or principles that need to be adhered to. As a result, each person has personal obligations by way of willful obeying God's given principles toward health. Neglecting those given principles will also mean, or will also entail sometimes to sickness. Sickness is a gracious judgment from God. There are some cases that are given in the Bible that suggest or that point to God's gracious judgment to those that are wayward, in a way to warn and to redeem. Number one, you notice the issue of Miriam's leprosy. She was punished for instigating rebellion or for instigating some displeasure with regard to Moses' wife. And God had to extend instant justice to her by way of administering leprosy on her. It was a way to warn her and also to redeem her. And from that point, you will notice she became calm and composed. Not only her, Gehazi's issue, when she followed Naaman and reclaimed some benefits or some gifts from Naaman, there was issue of instant justice when Gehazi became leprous. That instant justice was a way of expressing God's displeasure over what had happened and also warning those that were seeing. There is also a reference to people who died. 14,700 people died due to murmuring against Moses in the book of Numbers, chapter 16. 24,000 people died in the plains of Moab, Numbers 25. God would extend instant justice to people who fall sick instantly as a way to express his displeasure and also warn others. Such kind of warning, it is not an expression to say God is so vengeful to sinners, but it is a way of grace, expressing his grace to warn and to redeem. That should be understood as a way of God's gracious act to warn and to redeem his people. Sickness in the context of the great controversy. One of the things that can help us as a people to understand sickness and wholeness is to approach it and to understand it in the context of the great controversy. This means when you look at sickness, sometimes God allows it to happen as a way of addressing or as a way of counter attack to certain initiatives in the context of the great controversy, such as God's counter responses to idolatry. This you see in the book of Exodus. Before the exodus of his children from the bondage of Egypt, God had to extend 10 plagues to the Egyptians. It was in the context of the great controversy that God administered those 10 plagues. In the context of the great controversy, sometimes God permits sickness or plagues or suffering of people as a way of counter-responding to the devil's initiatives. Sickness is Satan's instrument. You also see it in the context of Job's suffering. The whole book of Job is built upon the great controversy between God and Satan. Satan accuses God, and God responds. And God permits Satan to administer the way, whatever, to administer sickness or to extend his hand on Job. In the context of the great controversy, Satan extends sickness on Job. Job suffers not because he's a sinner, but because of what is happening in the context of the great controversy. For us as a church, we also need to have an understanding of this. Once we gain this understanding that God can permit Satan to allow his people suffer. In the context of the great controversy, sickness can be endured by God's people, not because they are sinners, but because the great controversy is still ongoing. The church should also have this kind of understanding. This will help us on the way we treat those that are sick, whether through HIV and AIDS or any other form of sickness, than for us to look at these things or to look at these people who are suffering as victims as only punishment from God to their sinful acts. You look at the issue of demonic possession and Jesus' appeal to prayer and fasting in the book of Matthew, chapter 17, verse 14 and 21 to 21. Not only in this case, and many other instances, particularly in the Gospels, the issue of demonic possession, the devil uses it in the context of the great controversy. He uses it to disturb God's program as far as God's redemption program is concerned, by way of deranging the minds of God's children. God's people will not have a better appreciation of who God is and what God is doing toward redeeming them. So the devil uses demonic attacks to disturb God's program of redemption. And by way of counter, God also has a program to exorcise or to heal his people from demonic possession. But it looks like the church is not deliberate kind of program or kind of strategic intervention to those that are demonic possessed. In most cases, from my experience as a pastor in the field, this issue of demonic possession is an issue that many people, when it comes to this issue, they grow or they develop cold feet. Even pastors. We have no strategic kind of intervention to prepare pastors toward exorcising demoniacs or demons from those that are possessed. And yet the devil is using it in the context of the great controversy to attack God's program of redeeming his people. Then also, sickness as an eschatological showdown between God and Satan. If you look at the book of Revelation chapter 16, there are also 7 plagues that are given there. At the end, toward the close of time, God will have a counter showdown with the devil. And by so doing, God will allow 7 plagues to hit those that cherished idolatry of accepting him. So as a way of counter-idolatry, God is going to administer 7 plagues to demonstrate his power over the enemy of truth. Sickness as God's permissive will. Christ's response on who sinned in John chapter 9, verse 1 to 3, you will notice that when disciples asked Christ, who sinned between this blind man and his parents, that he was born blind? Christ said, none of them sinned. Whether the parents, neither the parents nor the blind man sinned. But this was done that the work of God may be revealed. So God sometimes permits sin to affect his people in order to demonstrate his power. So sin must be understood also in some circumstances as God's permissive will. In the case of Paul, in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 7 to 10, after praying in so many times, Paul asked God to do away with the thorn that was affecting him or disturbing him. It was a sickness that was disturbing Paul. God's response to Paul is, my grace is sufficient for you. Even in that sickness, God's strength is seen in your weakness. In other words, this happens as God's permissive will. Such kind of circumstances or situations or sicknesses must not be associated with the sin, as it were, particularly with the sin as a practice or as an act. Innocent victims sometimes suffer from sexual-related diseases that are brought about by unfaithful spouses. From all the demographics and statistics that were given as far as HIV and AIDS prevalence on African continent is concerned, not all of them are victims because of their waywardness or sinful practice in terms of unfaithful sexual issues. But some of them are suffering as innocent victims because of their unfaithful spouses. And some of them suffer as innocent victims because they were affected or they were infected by way of birth from suffering parents. Sickness and the imminence of parousia. Christ's message in the Olivet Discourse suggests that one of the signs that will punctuate or that will point to the nearness of the second coming is sickness. Christ or God will allow this thing to happen as a way to give a signal to his nearness or to his second coming. Sickness is also listed among the signs of the times. Then its prevalence and complexity towards the end is on the upward trend. With all the inventions in terms of technology and scientific discoveries, with all the inventions that we have in place, and with all the trainings that are done to prepare medical personnel, sickness is on the upward trend in terms of its prevalence and its complexity nature. God permits it to just demonstrate that the great controversy is still on. And as long as the fighting and as long as sin is still present, the issue of sickness will not come to an end until Christ will come to address it fully. Then that's when it will come to an end. Then sickness is God's danger warning message to the world. Sometimes because of suffering, some people come to acknowledge the power of God and seek to identify with him because of their need for redemption, both physical or temporal redemption and also ultimate eternal redemption from suffering. By way of conclusion, sickness and wholeness must be understood to have theological implications. You can't talk of sickness and wholeness without understanding the issue of sin. You can't understand the issue of sickness without understanding the issue of the great controversy. We cannot fully appreciate and understand the issue of sickness and wholeness without having an appreciation of the church and its mission. We cannot understand fully the issue of sickness and wholeness without understanding the role of Christ as our Redeemer, both from physical suffering or temporal suffering and ultimate Redeemer from all the issues that it disturbs humanity. We cannot fully appreciate the issue of sickness and wholeness without the eschatological appreciation of what Christ will do at the end. Christ is our role model in handling victims of sickness. Wellness is synonymous with holiness, not synonymous, but is synonymous with holiness. Wellness is a matter of grace that should be treasured by God's children. Health ministry is our collective responsibility. It is not an issue only that should need to be left to health practitioners or those that have been trained, particularly to save, as nurses, as doctors, as health officers, but it is our collective responsibility as a people or as a church. Some can give their hand into it, by way of prayer and fasting. This is coming under recommendations. The church should practice what it teaches. The message of health ministry that we have is holistic and it's powerful. But our practice of this message needs to be revisited. Love for everyone, despite status. Prayer and fasting must be done and must be practiced. Let's be available for those that are suffering. Let's look at the holistic approach for the suffering. Not only narrowing our approach towards the physical ailments, as it were. Let's also consider the issue of forgiving sinners by way of addressing spirituality. Let's also think of handling those that are mentally deranged, whether by demonic possession or by whatever means. Let's also put in place structures that address those that are mentally affected, and also social issues, healing social issues, by way of reconnecting people the same way Christ would do. Let's give hope even in the face of adversity. By having done this presentation and making this recommendation, I rest my case. Thank you. Asante sana, tatenda, siyabonga, twalumba.
Okay, thank you, Pastor Jairo, for your wonderful presentation. I hope that you have some questions to ask him. If you have questions, please raise your hand. We have one.
I have one or two quick questions. It surprises me sometimes, what answer do you have to this? Several times I've worked on the continent and I've gone to conduct meetings, and sometimes I'm baptizing. You find that those who are affected, that was in my case, those who begin manifesting demon possession are females. That's been my case. I don't know whether it was coincidental or maybe that's what happens. Why is it that, if that's the case, why is it that it's more women than men who manifest these things? I don't know the case of other places, but where I've been, that's been the case. Men are kind of quiet, but women, they begin making noise, misbehaving all the time, and they want to manifest a few things and say all kinds of things. Why is that? And the second question is, you have just made a statement that wholeness and holiness, they are synonymous. Would we safely say that if someone is demon-possessed and is manifesting things, would we say that immediately he is or she is unholy? I'm just trying to put it that way.
Okay. Let me respond to the first question before I come to the second one. The first one, your experience in the ministry to realize or to see that in most cases, it seems like women are more, in terms of being victims of demonic possession. It's common even also in Zimbabwe. I don't know the reason, but it is the trend, it's common. It's particular also, of course, it's there in Zimbabwe. I want to believe probably in other parts of the continent, it's also a similar experience. But it's true, women are seem to be more vulnerable to demonic attacks. Probably they are victims because they are less, they may not have, I think the devil take advantage of probably them, just like he did in the Garden of Eden. Probably, I don't know. They are less expecting to his attacks, so he takes advantage of that. I don't know the major reason behind it. Let me come to the second question that you have registered. Wholeness, it's true. Let me explain or re-explain what I have said. It is synonymous with holiness. That is, if wholeness is understood in all four aspects of spiritual health, physical health, mental health, and social health. If a person is demonic possessed, it means mentally that person is not operating at optimum level. That person is not mentally whole. So it's unholy. Because when Christ comes, his redemptive purpose is to restore holiness. That's why he would cast out the demons. Because his purpose of casting out the demons, he wants to restore wholeness in this victim or in his people. Because of that purpose towards restoring wholeness, that means a demon-possessed person is not holy.
I'm interested in your comments on prayer for healing. Sometimes prayers for healing do not get answered in the way we expect it. The same pastor can pray for healing for someone, that person gets healed, prays for someone else another day, doesn't get healed. Sometimes we pray and the person still dies or still remains sick. It's the same with anointing. Sometimes we anoint a very sick person. Sometimes they live, sometimes they die. I'm interested in your comment on why the Bible says, pray for the sick and they will live. But they don't always live.
Okay. Thank you, Pastor. I gave an example of Matthew chapter 17, verse 21, where Christ responded to say this kind of illness only comes out by way of prayer and fasting. He was responding to disciples' question to say, Master, we have been praying for this sick man and this demon was not going out. How come we failed to cast this demon out? These were people who had, at one point, if you read Mark 10, when Christ had given them power over demons, to cast out demons, they had gone and cast out the demons and healed the sick and brought a very good report. Master, even demons were shaking and trembling and crying at our command. And then, of course, he told them, do not be too much excited. Pray that, of course, your names are written, are written in the book of life, some kind of. Yes, they cast out demons previously, but in this particular case, they failed. It is because Christ, by his own definition, it is not always how you approach a particular case that makes the difference in all cases. It's not like that as far as exorcism is concerned. Today you pray for a person, the person is healed. Tomorrow you pray for a person, that person fails to get healed, and he dies. It's possible. The other thing that also is involved in is God's purpose with this kind of illness. Sometimes God permits this thing to happen in order to make an appeal to those that are surviving relatives of this kind of a person. For example, let me give you my experience. In one case, when we were trying to establish ourselves in an unended area, it was difficult. The people in the village or people in the area were not prepared to accommodate any one of us. They weren't prepared for anyone. We tried to talk to them, they weren't prepared. They would always say, we have our own churches, we have our own churches, we have our own churches. And we were praying, God, may you give us a way to enter into these houses. And God permitted one of the villagers to die. We say so. Why? Because what happened after the death, that's when they also called us to say, okay, if you have just some words of encouragement and comfort to the bereaved. And through that experience, the whole village, because someone has died, the whole village would come. They aren't coming for the sermon, they aren't coming for the message, they are coming for the funeral. It is that funeral that we managed to break through By way of trying to comfort the bereaved, we had to extend our message. At the end of the day, by the end of the week, the second week, crowds were now coming to our meetings. So sometimes God permits things to happen or mishaps to happen in order to appeal to the surviving ones. Yes, he has lost one, but more in number, or thousands or hundreds or tens, or a good number of people will come to Christ. So Christ sometimes permits that to happen in order to appeal or to communicate something to the surviving ones.
I don't know if there is another question. If no other questions now, I ask you to come together and appreciate the presentation of Pastor Ozvairo. Thank you very much.
We really appreciate at this time, just before we break for lunch, or we go for lunch, we are going to come right here to the front. We are going to do a group picture at this moment. But maybe before that, may we all rise for a word of prayer.